This is going to be a lecture on social constructivism. This lecture and the next provide a theoretical framework for interpreting the examples that we've studied in the first part of this course. So social constructivism originated in the study of science by sociologists and historians who were dissatisfied with the positivist notion that you could understand science separately from society simply on the basis of the rational considerations, arguments, and evidence that went into the construction of scientific theories. These sociologists and historians, starting, I think, mostly in the 1970s, began to argue that there is no radical separation of the rational components of science from its social context. And they employed this approach to the study of scientific controversies. They introduced what they called the principle of symmetry, according to which you could not claim that the winners in scientific controversies were rational, whereas the losers were simply influenced by social prejudices or customs of one sort or another. Rather, both losers and winners were influenced by rational and social considerations, according to this famous principle of symmetry. Applied to technology, we can see how it helps us understand controversies over design. The winning design, the one which prevails and which we now live with, is not necessarily better than the designs that lose, not better in some absolute sense. So here's a little constructivist glossary, and I'll explain all these terms as we go along. First, technical underdetermination. We've already discussed that. Then the concept of actors. Actors influence designs. Interpretative flexibility. Closure on a successful design. And co-construction. So we'll do them one by one. First, underdetermination. Recall Robert Moses' bridge example from Lecture 1. Technical principles and social choices combine in the specification of a technological design. There are variants with overlapping functions. For example, in the case of the bridge, the variants would be different heights. They all have the overlapping function of allowing cars to cross the parkway to get to local routes. But the social implications are different, as we've seen. So this leads to the conclusion that there is no deterministic development of technological paths. They can branch out in different directions. Power plays a role here, and this has to do then with the actors who intervene in design, some more powerful than others and therefore more influential on the outcome. There are three main types of actors. There's the corporate ones, the managers, inventors, and technologists who work in business. Then there are governments. The military innovates. Public institutions employ a lot of technology and develop it. And then regulation is a fashion by which the government intervenes in corporate and all other technological activities. But then there's a third type of actor. It's not much discussed, and these are the excluded, the people who don't get to have a say. Those workers in our examples of the development of the labor process who were not consulted. But sometimes they do intervene through protests. And that's an important part of the history of technology. They may also intervene through hacking, as we saw in the case of the Minitel, where hackers were not included in the original design plans, but managed to alter the design quite radically through their intervention. So technology creates networks. These technical networks encompass all the people and things that are involved in the technology. We can understand actors in terms of interests. The notion of participant interest, which I've introduced, is supposed to help us see how and why actors intervene as they do. What are the participant interests of the patients in the medical case? For example, where they hope to receive attention and care even if cure was unavailable. That participant interest then became the basis on which they altered the network and changed the design. Negotiations between actors, therefore, focus around their attempts to impose and reconcile their interests in the final design. So you can see now how all the examples fit together. The labor process, machine design, based on capitalist interests, led finally to conflicts with workers who put forward their interests, for example, in safer working conditions. That's a subject of many a strike and lots of negotiation. Or in the AIDS case, the doctors and researchers came into conflict with patients. They were able to reconcile their different interests through innovation in the design of experimental research. And then finally, the Minitel example, the technocrats who designed the system to distribute information met up with the hacking of the users who introduced communication into their system and created a system with additional functions. Today, we have the same kind of problem with respect to the internet. What kind of internet will it be? That depends on not just the big corporations that now control large segments of the system, but also the demands and protests of users who are getting more and more frustrated by the lack of privacy and the imposition of propaganda and advertising on their social activities. Okay, now interpretative flexibility. This is a technical term in science and technology studies. Technologies are designed to solve problems, but there's no absolute registry of what are problems. Problems are something that are perceived by human beings, and people may see the problems differently. The problem definitions depend on the meanings people give to the technology and the situation in which it's deployed. In the beginning, computers were thought to be calculating devices and devices for storing data. Users imposed on computers a different meaning. The computers became communication devices. This is a meaning ascribed by actors, excluded from the original design. So there's a question of interpretation here. What meaning do you give to things? You have to answer the question, what is it, before you can be sure what it's supposed to do. And there are controversies over meaning. Here's an example of a conflict of interpretations. Is this a duck or is it a rabbit? Take your pick. And in the case of technologies, this is often exactly what is going on. Some people see a duck, others a rabbit, some a communication device or a scientific research system, others a communication device or a caring system of care for patients. Here's the way two scholars in science studies explain the issue. They say the different interpretations by social groups of the content of artifacts lead by means of different chains of problems and solutions to different further developments. So that's a succinct definition of interpretative flexibility. Those two scholars, Pinch and Biker, apply their theory in great detail to the early bicycle. The early designs there were two early designs. There was a racing design, which you can see from the picture, and a design that aimed at stability. Now, before there were gears, the only way to go fast on a bike was to have a large front wheel, which is the equivalent of being in high gear. but of course it makes the bike less stable. If you just want to go to the market and buy some lettuce, you don't need to go fast, and you certainly need stability far more than speed. And so bicycles were made also with two wheels the same size. And that, of course, is the design which finally won out. But these designs correspond to different actors. The high front wheel was favored by young men who engaged in racing on their bikes. Utilitarian users were the ones who wanted to have wheels the same size so they'd be less likely to fall off. So Pinch and Biker explore the controversy between these two designs in the late 19th century that led finally to our current type of bicycle. Closure is the result of the end of a technological controversy. A final design prevails and is, in the terminology of social constructivism, black boxed. As to say, it becomes simply a taken for granted fact. It doesn't occur to us when we see bicycles with two wheels the same size to wonder how they got that way. It just seems obvious that they should be that way because that's a good design. It's stable, it's efficient. Closure ends controversy, but the black box can be reopened, perhaps not in the case of bicycles, but in the case of the Minitel, for example. A finished design was reopened by hackers, as we've seen. The energy system today is another example of a vast technological system that was black boxed. We knew exactly how to generate energy with oil, with coal, with natural gas, and today it's being reopened by the pressures of the public to create a sustainable energy system based on renewables. And in this case, there's a new relevant actor, youth. Young people don't want to live in a world that has been fried by climate change, and their protests are having a great influence on the corporations and governments that control the energy system. So I'll be concluding with this in the next slide. The concept of co-construction was introduced by people in science and technology studies to talk about the way in which humans and technologies evolve together. The meanings that we give to technologies, the problems they're intended to solve, have an effect on the world, makes the world more usable for us, but it also has an effect on us. It shapes the kind of human beings we are. So humans construct technologies, but technologies construct humans. Designs have the effect of scripting our behavior. They determine what kind of things we do in the course of the day, and they help to define what it is to be human. And here is an illustration that I like a lot, which shows co-construction. These two hands are each drawing each other. There is no bottom line here, but no source, but simply a mutual interaction. And that, I think, describes our relation to technology very, very well.